So far in this NCAA tournament, we have seen some astonishing record-breaking performances. But when the chips have been down, the cream has risen to the top. We are down to 4 as they all march to Minneapolis. Next. And we have now made our way to 4 teams off to Minneapolis for the Final Four for this year's NCAA tournament. How does your brackets holding up so far? It's great to have you with us here on Your View for the March to Minneapolis. I'm Victor Howell. You can see I'm in the solo chair here in the studio. Why? Well, the food is so good down here in New Orleans. My partner, Adam Finkelstein, didn't want to come down and eat anymore. He had to stay away. We put him on satellite this week because he's been enjoying all the food down here so much. But, of course, he's with us to talk more basketball. Adam, it's great to see you via satellite. When you and I started this 2 weeks ago with 68 teams, if I would have told you we'd be left with a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 5, I'm not sure the 1 would have been picked Virginia. What do you think about the 4 teams that have advanced?
Well, let me put it to you like this. Texas Tech and Virginia got in. I thought my bracket was perfect. I had Duke and Kentucky, and then obviously things went a different way yesterday. So, I think obviously people were surprised when Duke and Kentucky didn't win it. Virginia Tech, Michigan State, Auburn, a ton of great stories in this year's Final Four, though.
There's a lot of really good stories of some good games. People thought the first 2 rounds might have been boring, not so much in the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8, and we're going to talk about those teams that have advanced. And let's start in the East bracket because one of the teams that did advance made their way past Duke, but also made their way past the LSU Tigers, a team, of course, we have focused on here in one of our Your View viewing areas down here in South Louisiana. Michigan State got past LSU 80-63 in what was a relatively easy game for the Spartans. Duke held on again for a last second against Virginia Tech before the Blue Devils lost to Michigan State. More on that game in a moment, but Adam, let's turn our attention to LSU and Michigan State for a moment because, boy, the Tigers came out flat in that game. The Spartans just seemed to have all the energy early on. They had a huge lead in the first half. In fact, LSU was sitting on a deficit that was their biggest, 28 points in the first half for LSU, their lowest of the season. They were down at one point by 17, made that little run in the second. But, boy, after that, it really was all about the green and white from start to finish in that game.
You know, it was that old Mike Tyson line, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, Tom Izzo's club, they came out and punched LSU in the mouth, and they just were never able to recover. I mean, just the physicality with which Michigan State played and the execution in terms of the lack of turnover, something we talked about last week. They handled their business on both ends of the floor, established the way the game was going to be played from the get-go, and then never took their foot off the gas.
LSU has had a problem with defending the 3 all season long. There were spurts during the season where it got good, but that really showed up again in the second against Michigan State. 13 made 3-pointers by the Spartans. So LSU finishes the season with 28 wins. That's tied for second most in school history. They also scored just over 80 points a ball game. That's the highest since 91-92 when a guy named Shaquille O'Neal was wearing the purple and gold. So some really impressive numbers now for LSU. But Adam, as we move it forward now to talk about LSU, there's the overhanging Will Wade situation, which is really in Wade's hands and the university's hands right now. But we should also focus on the players. Do you see players like Tremont Waters and Naz Reid? We know Bigby Williams is gone, but with Tremont Waters and Naz Reid, are those 2 players from your position as a scout, do you see them trying to move on and head to the NBA?
Well, being ready for the NBA and being likely to test the waters are 2 very different things in my experience. I don't think either one of those guys are ready to crack an NBA rotation yet. Having said that, I think they will both declare, given the new rules. We'll wait to see if they come back. I think, you know, the disclaimer to all of this is so much of what happens with those 2 guys depends on what happens with Will Wade. If Will Wade doesn't come back, it's hard to imagine either one of them coming back. Even if Will is back, I think you'd be naive not to think that both of those guys going to go through the process. I would be very surprised if Nas didn't go, try and make the jump right away. That's always been the reputation around him, even coming up in high school. He's always thought he was one and done. He's been intent to prove it. Tremont's a little bit of a different story. He may be the better college player, but he's not quite the same NBA level prospect because of the size and the physical deficiencies when you get to that highest level. So Tremont, I think, very much up in the air, tied to Will's situation. I think you'll be hard-pressed to see Nas back in that maroon in that gold uniform anytime soon.
Well, and it's interesting to say because I know you're a scout, it's what you do, but it's one thing to think that you can be one and done. It's another thing to realize your skill set.
Yes, it
I think
is.
a lot of fans would see that Naz Reid could probably use one more year to work some more on that skill set and get him ready for the next level. But ultimately, it's his decision, and we'll see what decision he makes. For more on that, let's bring in Vin Parise. We're going to head to our New York area. College basketball coach, college basketball analyst. Vin, it's great to have you with us from the Big Apple as we talk the Final Four. We were just mentioning about Michigan State and LSU. We'll talk Spartans in just a moment, but your thoughts quickly on LSU and the situation, the year the Tigers had, and what could come now for LSU.
Well, I agree with Adam, and obviously we have to take Adam's point of view about what these guys are going to do in terms of maybe their re-recruitment or looking to move on for other situations. But about LSU this year, I think if there's one thing from Selection Sunday on throughout the first week of the tournament that us as analysts all overanalyze and did not take into account is how highly talented this group was. We talked about Will Wade, we talked about a team in turmoil, and we talked about a team entering the field without their leader. But what they did against Maryland and the way they played in this tournament and showing that poise, I think put them on a big-time stage and showed people a lot about those kids.
Vin, we're going to move on to the West bracket in just a moment, but let me get your thoughts on the big game between Michigan State and Duke. When the brackets first came out, a lot of people said, boy, it's not fair that Duke's in Michigan State's in Duke's bracket. As we come to find out, it wasn't fair that Duke was in Michigan State's bracket with the way they played. Once again, Duke had a chance late to try to get some free throws. They haven't been a good free throw shooting team as of late, but down the stretch, Michigan State made the plays. Duke could not, and it's the Spartans for the first time since 2015 moving on to the Final Four. What were your thoughts as you watched this regional final play out between Duke and Michigan State?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because they shouldn't have been in the same region. That was the best of the two seeds. That was an epic game yesterday that we should have been treated to in either the Final Four or the national championship game, not an Elite Eight game. That being said, this is probably the best slate of Elite Eight games ever. You look at what Michigan State did physically on the inside and doing the little things, but I think Michigan State, just like Virginia, they epitomize what this tournament has been about. And it's been about veteran play, guys with experience, and not so much maybe about the most talented teams. I think the biggest thing that stands out from that game yesterday is that Zion Williamson took one shot in the final 6 minutes and 42 seconds. And that's attributed to youth on Duke's end, even though he's the best player in the country. But it's also attributed to Tom Izzo, his game plan, and the veteran leadership and defense of the Spartans.
And that had happened once before. Duke didn't lose a lot this season, but there was a previous game. He didn't take a shot in the last 2 or 3 minutes, and you're right. Yep. He was dominating on the inside. Duke could not get him the ball, and Michigan State moves on. Let's focus our attention on the West region. And everybody, quickly, if you had Texas Tech in the finals, raise your hand. Mine's up. We talked about it last week. I said I'd take a flyer on Texas Tech, and look at this. Gonzaga got past Florida State, but Texas Tech held Michigan to 44 points in the round of Sweet 16, and then they go on to face a high offense, octane offense from Gonzaga, and the Red Raiders win it 75-69. Then let's talk about the Red Raiders and what they did. You know, you look at their roster. We're going to get Adam's thoughts on this in just a moment. It's not loaded with a lot of five-star athletes, but boy, what Chris Beard has done in Lubbock to bring Texas Tech back, not only to this stage again, but advance to the Final Four. How about the effort of the Red Raiders to get to this point?
So this is the story of the Final Four, really. If you want to put yourself in a Cinderella mindset, even though they're not Cinderella. I mean, this is back-to-back Elite Eights, now a Final Four. Think about how much they lost from last year's Elite Eight team, and now they come back with this unbelievable run. I mean, you talk to NBA scouts now, Jarrett Culver has maybe turned himself into a top 5 lottery pick. Chris Beard's been a Division I head coach for only 4 years. Their defense is absolutely smothering. And when you play defense that efficient, if things could go right for you offensively, anything could happen. And we saw that with UConn in 2014. Don't put it past these Red Raiders making some noise in Minneapolis. Unbelievable story.
Absolutely agree. And Adam, we've got about 45 seconds, and I know with your scouting and looking to players, you just heard Vin mention Culver. This is a guy who was a 3-star athlete, dropped because of some injuries, and now he's put himself into a top 10, top 15 NBA prospect and what he's done. Look ahead for us, Texas Tech and Michigan State, and your thoughts on what you see and the idea that Vin was just discussing. the fact that they believe they can be there now. They don't have to have a 5-star laden roster. They believe they belong there, and they believe they should have the title.
Yeah, Chris Beard has total buy-in here. Remember, they are the top-ranked defense in the entire country, so they're going to be able to go toe-to-toe with Michigan State. I expect Culver to be able to utilize his athleticism. Look for the possessions in this game to be smaller than Texas Tech has played in previous rounds. Defense is going to win this one.
Defense has been winning it for Texas Tech so far, and that's why they are in the Final Four. It's a look at the East and the West bracket. We're going to take a quick timeout. When we come back, 2 more brackets to focus on. We'll look at the South, and then we'll look at the Midwest as we now have a party of 4 with a reservation in Minneapolis. We'll be back in just a moment.